Good evening, welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward. Going into the 8th day of their blockade, tensions are running high on Tyendinaga Territory. But in a new development, the Minister of Indigenous Affairs has sent an email asking to meet.
This is where it's supposed to happen. Mark Miller has requested a meeting on Saturday with the blockade. Now, they're not granting interviews, but the word is meetings have been going on through the night and into this morning. Other than that, the day has been pretty uneventful, with police keeping their distance. The only people showing up are supporters. Now, some are Indigenous, but most are non-Indigenous people from the area who just want to come and show support and bring supplies. Now, they're bringing stuff like water, food, and wood just to show their support for the Wet'suwet'en land defenders. People like Maricino Montesinos. He's South American born, but has been living in Canada for 27 years. He's a social worker and music teacher from Kingston.
And it's very important for us as the people of Canada to support our Aboriginal people, especially in cases where their right to protect their land is at risk. It's very important to stand up with them to protect lands that can be at risk of abuse by corporations.
Jocelyn Wabano Ayatel is a Cree pipe carrier from Attawapiskat. She came from Ottawa to voice her support. She said this movement started with the Wet'suwet'en, but with Indigenous people from coast to coast, it's starting to become much more than that.
This is far more than the 5 clans of our brothers and sisters in the Western Doorway. This is impacting all the nations of Mikanakaski, the original nations of Turtle Island. And so, we need to be talking about the original laws of our people. When these invaders are coming to us, speaking to us about colonial rule of law, those are your laws. I have a right to be who I am as an Inino Iosko with my own Onashawewan, my own human being law. The people of the lands law, the Espogan law, the sacred pipe law. This is what I mean.
They've told us to call them protectors and not protesters. And they say Mohawk warriors are there to protect all Indigenous people. They say they're a small group making a big impact and that they have a voice. And now, Canada's listening. Jamie Pashagumska, APTN National News, Tyendinaga.
Residents of the Mi'kmaq First Nation of Listuguj in Quebec's Gaspé region are still holding strong in their own demonstration in support of the Wet'suwet'en. For 4 days, a railway blockade has disrupted freight train deliveries of lumber and cement along the 325-kilometer train line running from Matapedia to New Richmond, causing substantial losses for industry players. The group manning the makeshift camp say they're prepared to hold out for weeks if necessary and have yet to report any interference by authorities. Yesterday, supporters of the Wet'suwet'en faction opposed to the CGL pipeline set up a railway blockade just west of the city of Winnipeg, near Headingley. As Daryl Stranger tells us, the action has the attention of Manitoba Premier Brian Pallister.
It was a small crowd, 6 people blocking a section of CN's main line used for passenger and freight trains. But they stopped 2 trains dead in their tracks. This action is one of a growing number across Canada in support of the Wet'suwet'en people arrested for trying to stop a pipeline from running through their land. Calling Buffalo is the organizer of the Manitoba action, who hopes a public backlash will force government and industry to deliberate more carefully about how they deal with Indigenous people.
What's happening now will shape how traditional territories and resources will be accessed. Now, what's happening can help our people and those who have conflict with the industry in the future. Industry and police will think twice about how they handle projects and invading our territories.
The Manitoba government was going to seek a court injunction to remove the makeshift blockade, but Premier Brian Pallister says that CN beat him to the punch. They got their own injunction and served it last night.
Now, yesterday we expressed our willingness to file an injunction. In communication with CN Rail, we found that they had concurrently filed one. Theirs has already been approved, so it's not necessary. for us to file, as a province, to file an injunction today, but we are clearly standing up against two-tier law in our country and for a better process of dealing with important economic and environmental projects.
As a result, the group has left the blockade. The organizer says they are not deterred and will be setting up at a new location. Daryl Stranger, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
A short time ago, CN Rail announced it was shutting down its eastern operations. The company says it will stop and safely secure all transcontinental trains across its Canadian network. And this could lead to temporary layoffs affecting employees in eastern Canada. That move led Via Rail to announce it will cancel all of its passenger services until further notice. CN says so far over 400 trains have been cancelled in the last week. In Vancouver, about 100 people occupied the office of BC's Attorney General. Supporters of Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs who opposed the Coastal GasLink pipeline took over David Eby's office this morning, sending office staff members home. By occupying his office, the protesters hope to get an in-person meeting with David Eby. No meetings have been planned so far. They want BC's Attorney General to revoke all permits associated with LNG Canada and Coastal GasLink projects in the province.
We want to put pressure on him to revoke the permits that the pipeline has been approved upon and to have actual reconciliation, not recolonization. You can have one or the other, but you can't have both, period.
Meanwhile, the head of a group of Indigenous leaders who back resource development say the ongoing protests are, quote, ridiculous. The National Coalition of Chiefs is a pro-resource development community of pro-resource development First Nation chiefs and Métis leaders. Its members include some of the elected chiefs of Wet'suwet'en First Nation. The president of NCC, Dale Swampy, believes the ongoing protests and blockades are being organized by non-Indigenous environmental groups. Swampy says environmental concerns and issues with Coastal GasLink raised by elected leaders along the route have been mitigated.
You're not getting elected leaders out there because they have one concern, and that is people across the desk from them every day are asking for jobs. You just can't give it to them because we don't have the opportunities. These environmentalists are holding us back. When we try to get something going, it gets destroyed.
And in other news, an update now on a story we've been telling you about for roughly 1 year. Forbes Brothers Construction has been fined $150,000 in connection with the death of one of their employees. The Edmonton company was facing several charges under Manitoba workplace safety laws. Todd Mayatawashing of Lake Manitoba First Nation was killed while working on the transmission line for the Kiask Dam in January 2018. Forbes Brothers pleaded guilty to failing to have a safe workplace procedure. The other charges were stayed. Still to come, why more than a dozen chiefs walked out of a meeting with the Premier of Alberta.
Hello, I'm Todd Lamoran, and here's what we'll have for you on Nation to Nation. A Tahltan UBC journalism professor gives her thoughts on the Wet'suwet'en impasse, comparing the national Indigenous response to Idle No More and the Oka crisis. As well, modern treaty holders were in Ottawa. BC's treaty commissioner believes modern treaty agreements would have helped stakeholders avoid conflict in northern BC. And the Grand Chief of the Klingshan Nation in the NWT drops by. He says his modern agreement makes his community a full partner in resource development. That's coming up right after the national news.
Here's a look at Friday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast. 0 in St. John's, 13 below under sunny skies for Fredericton. Minus 17 with snow in Nain, 26 below for Inukjuak. Minus 14 under sunny skies in Montreal and Quebec City. 8 below in Toronto, minus 11 and sunny for Ottawa. Minus 9 in Thunder Bay, 15 below for Kapuskasing. Minus 12 and snow for Puckatawagan, Thompson, and God's Lake. Minus 8 with snow in Winnipeg, sunny, and 4 below for Brandon. Minus 4 in North Battleford and Saskatoon, where snow is on the way. 5 below for Meadow Lake, minus 12 in Buffalo Narrows.
Welcome back. There's an update in a family and First Nations push for a coroner's inquest in Ontario. Today, Regional Coroner Karen Schiff announced that the request for an inquest into the death of 16-year-old Devon Freeman has been granted. Elena McDougall spoke with Devon's grandmother, Pamela Freeman, and a warning: this story discusses suicide.
In his short life, I have good memories, but I always knew I needed help.
Finally, a break for this grandmother and hopefully for other families. The request made by Pamela Freeman and the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation for a coroner's inquest into the death of Devon Freeman has been granted.
All children have plans. They all want to grow up. They want their independence. But he would have never had me out of his life as long as we both got the help we needed. And this is gonna help me on my journey as I step forward. And I'm gonna help other people.
Pamela's grandson Devon was reported missing on October 6, 2017, just days after his family gathered here at this park.
It was sunny, everybody was happy, laughing, and I can always remember that day.
But it was also a hard time. Devon's mother had died 10 years before, and it would be the last time his family saw him alive. The 16-year-old was struggling with grief and mental health diagnoses, which led to his residency at the Linwood Charlton Center's Flamborough site, where it was expected he would get help. Instead, 7 months passed before his body was found, hanging from a tree, just 35 meters from the residence. APTN learned of a second similar death about 2 years prior to Devon's, soon after Freeman's call for an inquest was made in December. Tyra Williams' Story was also at Linwood and hanged herself in a different wooded area in 2015. A coroner's inquest may provide answers about what happened in the days and hours before Devon's death by suicide, and possibly what more could have been done so that other parents can be sure their kids are safe.
I don't want other people to be afraid to send their children to facilities that offer mental health, because that's the last place I thought he would die.
Hours after Coroner Karen Schiff announced approval of her request for an inquest, Pamela is thankful for the support she's received from people and from nature.
The answers will provide me with enough confidence, courage, and strength to heal myself and help somebody else's journey.
One of the next steps is determining who will be part of the inquest. Lawyers will determine the scope of the inquest, but the coroner decides who participates. Hamilton police supported Pamela Freeman and the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation in their call for an inquest and will most likely participate as the investigating police in Devon's disappearance and his death. All this means it will likely be several years before the inquest actually takes place. Elena McDougall, APTN National News, Hamilton.
Over 20 chiefs from Treaty 8 walked out on meetings with Alberta Premier Jason Kenney yesterday at Government House. The meeting with the Premier and Minister of Children's Services was about Indigenous children in care and the newly passed federal Bill C-92. The bill allows Indigenous communities to negotiate with Canada and the provinces to exercise jurisdiction over children and family services. Chiefs from the Treaty 8 First Nation say they left the meeting because they do not believe the Alberta government is properly consulting them. Chiefs from Treaty 6 and 7 stayed in the meeting.
We're tired of that. And basically, when we went there, even though the meeting was on C-92, basically as sovereign nations of Treaty 8, they say, okay, enough of this. We're going to develop our own process, our own legislation, our own governance process, and, you know, we'll bring the government, federal government in and the provincial government in, and this is how it is.
2 First Nations in Ontario are being courted as potential sites to store Canada's nuclear waste. And as APTN investigative reporter Christopher Reed found out, not everyone is on board. Here's a preview of Nuclear Courtship Part 2.
Nestled within the rugged wilderness of northwestern Ontario, the township of Ignace and surrounding area is being considered as a possible site for a deep geological repository, or DGR. The Nuclear Waste Management Organization is pitching the locals the DGR concept, which involves entombing used nuclear fuel for 250,000 years plus in the Canadian Shield. Outside of town, the NWMO is busy drilling boreholes, the goal being to determine if the underground rock here is right for a $23.6 billion nuclear crypt.
And you can watch the entire episode of Nuclear Courtship Part 2 tomorrow night right here after the APTN National News. Still to come, a new play about the death of Colton Bushy is playing to sold-out audiences. Stick around.
Here's the rest of Friday's weather forecast. Piggyback up in northern Alberta, -8 for Grand Prairie, 22 below in high level. +3 with snow for Medicine Hat, sunny skies and 3 above in Calgary. 9 above under sunny skies for Vancouver, rain and +9 in Victoria, -19 for Fort Nelson, +1 in Smithers. 37 below in Old Crow, -31 for Dawson. 22 below with snow in Fort Liard, Trout Lake and Yellowknife. -24 for Sax Harbor, 33 below for Inuvik. -35 in Cambridge Bay, 33 below for Baker Lake. -25 in Resolute, -34 for Joe Haven.
Welcome back. In Saskatoon, a play about the Gerald Stanley trial has been running for the last month to sold-out audiences. And as APTN's Priscilla Wolf tells us, the story about the death of Colton Bushy has more and more people talking about the issue of racism in Saskatchewan.
Saskatoon is sky and light and the smell of the rivers.
The sold-out play Reasonable Doubt has been running in Saskatoon since the end of January. It's based on several interviews about racism across Saskatchewan and the official transcripts from the Gerald Stanley trial. Joel Birnbaum was one of the creators of the play.
I am one of 3 co-creators of the play Reasonable Doubt. I'm the interviewer and editor, along with Lancelot Knight, who's the composer and a performer, and Yvette Nolan, the director-dramaturge.
Birnbaum says before the Gerald Stanley trial, he had started conducting interviews for a project about racism, but after the trial, he changed direction.
Every single person I talked to was struggling with this relationship, whether they were Indigenous or non-Indigenous, old or young, whether they'd been in Saskatchewan a long time or a short time, whether they were in the business community or whether they were a student.
Answers to his questions about race relations in Saskatchewan became raw and real. The play's purpose is to start those conversations about racism here in Saskatchewan. Before last night's final sold-out performance, the audience took part in a discussion about racism in Saskatchewan. But only a handful of Indigenous people were in attendance. Lenora Felix was one of them. She spoke bluntly to the group about her fears about racism and how she feels unsafe after Gerald Stanley was acquitted for the murder of Colton Bushy.
As an Indigenous woman, I fear for my life every day. I fear for my life. I fear for whether I'm going to face racism and prejudice. But now I worry about my brothers, my nephews, my brothers. the sons, because now it feels as though there is a target on all of them, and that it's open hunting season on Indigenous men.
She feels since the verdict, racial tensions have escalated in Saskatchewan.
One of my main concerns now, as I speak with my Indigenous sisters and brothers in the communities around Saskatchewan, not just Saskatoon, is that we're feeling and facing and experiencing a new wave, is what we're calling it, a new wave of racism, a new wave of hate. Really.
Priscilla Wolf, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
Hope they take that on the road. In lighter news, the 51st annual Festival du Voyageur begins this weekend in Winnipeg. The 2-week winter festival celebrates all things French-Canadian, and this year, more Indigenous programming. Brittany Hobson shows us one family has become a big part of these celebrations.
Using a shovel, Wayne Stranger chips away at a block of snow with confidence. You wouldn't know it, but this is a first for the artist. Stranger is part of Festival de Voyageur's International Snow Sculpture Symposium, a decision that was only made last week.
It took about 2 seconds to say, yeah, I'll do it. Even though I haven't done it before, I figured, yeah, I'll do it.
Stranger is from Peguis First Nation in Manitoba. He is the first First Nations man to participate in the symposium. That's because festival organizers committed to promoting the celebration of Indigenous culture. So more First Nations artists, musicians, and programming are included. Stranger calls his piece Return from the Mountain. It's based on a traditional story.
The elder spoke of a time when the buffalo went away into the mountain when Europeans first came. Colonialism kind of took hold and went into the mountain to protect our teachings. And then when I went to the Sundance at that time, 30 years ago, he said to me, well, not to me, but to a group of people, he said, we're of that time where the buffalo are coming back from the mountain now and bringing those teachings back to the people.
Stranger has been a bronze sculptor for 30 years. Working with snow for the first time hasn't been challenge-free.
So it's minus 30-ish or minus 28 today. So you're dealing with a big temperature extreme, and then your medium is the snow, and your tools have changed to not power tools, shovels, scrapers, things, so it's a big switch.
Being part of Festival has become a family affair. Stranger's son Jordan designed this year's logo.
Just to have my father be a part of the festival as well and take part as an artist, it really shows a lot of value on family that they focus on here and community. And that to me is very good in my view.
It intertwines Francophone and Indigenous culture with the use of Fort Gibraltar, a former Northwest Company trading post, and a teepee and Four Directions cross.
And for me to be a part of this process and to have my work be the face of their festival is tremendous. It's an honor, and I'm very humbled.
Festival de Voyageur begins February 14th and runs until the 23rd. Brittany Hobson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
And looking forward to Donamero this weekend, Louis Riel weekend. That's your APTN National News for this Thursday. For more, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. Stick around. Todd Lamarand is next with much more on Nation to Nation. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you back here tomorrow.